But the main thing with our show today is that Howie quote, which, of course, there's not audio of because a portion of what he said was said just to reporters without the audio recorders. But, Eliot, I want to read for you, and I'll read for everyone right now, especially if you're just tuning in and hearing this for the first time, Howie's quote yesterday, as quoted by Zach Berman on Twitter. And Eliot, you know it, but let me read it and then your reaction. Howie said, talking about the offseason, it may look different. Some of the moves that we may have to make here may not be what are necessarily on other people's minds. It's probably not going to look like maybe the conventional wisdom thinks it should look. I would just ask our fans to just have patience throughout the offseason. The offseason doesn't stop in free agency. The offseason doesn't stop in the draft. Eliot, what is your reaction to what he said?
Yeah, so I was there when Howie said it. I followed up and asked him for more detail on what he meant by it's going to look different. He didn't really, as you would expect, go into details.
Yeah.
But what I would say is I think the Eagles are going into free agency looking or expecting that they're going to get comp picks. So what that means is they're big free agents like Josh Sweat, Milton Williams, probably Mekhi Becton, not as sure about him. They're likely going to sign big contracts elsewhere. And as a result, if the Eagles early in free agency go out and sign other players, they lose those comp picks. So you look at the timeline of the offseason. Initially in free agency, I don't think they'll be active. Then you have the draft. And then after the draft, then you can go and sign guys that don't really count against the comp pick formula as much. So what I think Howie is trying to caution fans is, the first day of free agency, the first few days of free agency, I would not expect big-time moves. So I think that's what he's trying to say is caution against that. It's going to look different. They have all offseason to address these needs. And I think he knows there'll probably be some initial worry when guys like Milton Williams, Josh Sweat, and others sign elsewhere.
I noticed that you didn't say Zach Bond's name when you talked about the guys who were signing elsewhere. Is that intentional on your part, Eliot?
Yeah, I think they're going to re-sign Zach Bond. I don't, I can't say 100%, but I would be very surprised if Zach Bond did not re-sign with the Eagles. I think of the four guys, he's the one that they are actively trying to re-sign. I think they would have interest in re-signing Mekhi Becton if the market is not what I guess maybe Becton expects. I would compare it a little bit, not the player, but the James Bradbury situation where they thought he would probably sign elsewhere. The market ended up not being what Bradbury thought, and so he came back. I think that's similar to Becton.
Boy, was the market right about Bradbury, by the way.
Yeah.
He was done, and I didn't know it.
Yeah, but I think with Bond, there is an active pursuit of trying to re-sign him. So I expect them to be able to re-sign Bond.
Well, I'll tell you this, Eliot, and I hope you're right on the Bond front. I think you're right on the timing front of moves later in the spring, and potentially summer, and what Howie framed it with that quote. But my biggest takeaway
from the itinerary's pushed back a little bit.
But my biggest takeaway from that quote, Eliot, is he's telling the fans, brace yourself. We're going to get pretty hit here. We're going to get hit hard in free agency.
Well, hold on. He's saying things are different. He's saying this year. Well, why can't it just be the itinerary is pushed back because the Super Bowl pushed it back? That's not the heart of the quote.
The heart of the quote is we're going to lose more good players than we gain, and prepare yourself, fans, for that. That's what he's saying, Eliot, right?
I think what he's saying is initially. I think initially it is going to feel like this roster is way worse than it was last year because guys will leave, and you will see them initially probably not be super active in free agency. But I think what Howie's trying to say is there's the draft, there's after the draft, there's training camp. And you think about last year, the first day of free agency, they went out, they signed Saquon, they signed Bryce Huff, who didn't work out, but that's $70 million in guaranteed money right there. Yeah. I just think that's not what they're going to do this year.
Eliot, what's the scuttlebutt there on Myles Garrett? You have a chance to talk to other reporters from other teams, Cleveland people. What's the word on Myles Garrett?
Yeah, so I was at the Andrew Berry press conference yesterday when he insisted for 10 minutes they weren't going to they were not going to trade Myles Garrett. And my biggest takeaway from that was they're absolutely trading Myles Garrett. I have been at so many of these press conferences where a GM gets peppered with questions about a guy, and it's well, we're not going to trade him. We're not going to trade him. If it reaches that point, you are going to trade him. So I think it's just a matter of where he gets traded. And to the other part of your question, there is not a place you go here when you talk about Myles Garrett and the Eagles don't come up. And I think that's because Howie has that reputation of being very active when it comes to pursuing, star players. I asked Howie about it yesterday at the podium. Of course, he didn't say anything about it, as one would expect. But in the off-the-podium sessions, he did say, and, you guys can choose to believe him or if you think he's just setting expectations, he did say that, the timing is probably not right to trade a high-level asset and sign a big contract for Myles Garrett. I'll just believe it when I see it. Like, if once Myles Garrett is traded somewhere else, then obviously you'll know he's not coming here. But Howie is so aggressive. They have the draft capital to do it. Acquiring Myles Garrett does not impact the comp formula, so it's a way to add a big player without impacting that. So I just think it makes so much sense that until he's elsewhere, I'll always believe the Eagles have a chance.
Eliot, there's Myles Garrett. He's owed $22.4 million per year for the next 2 years. What are the chances that we could get some prove it play out of his current Browns contract for the Eagles' benefit? Is that just a pipe dream on my part? Are we to expect that it's automatic that he's going to get re-upped into a massive deal, or is it possible we could get some bargain play, some prove-it play from Myles Garrett?
Yeah, I think asking Myles Garrett and his agent to prove it would probably be a tough sell at this point.
Why? Because he wants to go win a Super Bowl.
He wants to get paid.
We provide something too.
Well, because he's had like 15 sacks 4 straight years. I feel like he's proven he's a pretty good player. So I just think
he's the best defensive player in the league.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. That's why I'm saying I think that the team that acquires him is going to have to pay him a big-time contract. I mean, guys just don't get traded really at this stage of their career without getting a new contract. I do understand your point that if he just wants to go win, maybe the contract is not as big of a deal as it is in other trade situations. But I also think the Eagles will probably want to redo that deal. You don't want to have a $22 million cap hit, which I actually don't think it would be that high. But regardless, I think that they would redo the deal if they acquired him. And it would be an expensive deal because he is arguably the best defensive player in the NFL.
Yeah, I agree with that. Eliot, I want to get to the tush-push thing. So I was really impressed with the way Sirianni presented things yesterday. We've played a couple times today, one piece of audio in which, in his defense of the tush-push, he said that he felt insulted, that the league's, the people are talking about getting rid of it. I want to play a different piece of audio because he also used the word unfair. I mean, it's the two big words he applied to it yesterday were insulted and unfair. Listen to Sirianni yesterday talking about he thinks it's unfair.
It's a skill that our team has because of the players that we have, the way the coaches coach it. There's just so much time put into it. The fact that it's a successful play for the Eagles and people want to take that away, I think is a little unfair.
All right, and again, he's not saying the tush push is unfair. Quite the opposite. He's saying the clamor about it is unfair. Eliot, I thought he did a masterful job in presenting his side of the argument that, could sway some voters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of what he's saying in a shorter way is it's not the push that makes this play successful.
It's the technique?
It's everything to them. Like, I think they view it as the way the offensive linemen come off the ball and the way they attack the defensive line, the way Jalen takes the snap and is then able to push himself. Obviously, then he gets pushed, but the way Jalen does it. But the other part of this, too, is, and I thought this was an excellent point by him, the amount of time they spend practicing this play during the week, like, it is not just that they line up and do it on Sunday. And so they came up with the play. They perfected how to run it. They spend, I would assume, more time than any other team in practicing it. He also brought up how it's a difficult play to practice, and they've had to spend time figuring out how to practice it. So there's so much emphasis on the actual push part, which I understand it is a unique part of the play. But I think their argument to the NFL, if it does get to this point, will be, there are so many other things involved here that just to simplify it as automatic, does undermine all the work that they have put into it.
Eliot, who else did the Eagles interview for the offensive coordinator position besides Kevin Patullo?
They will not say. I'll tell you that. Yesterday, trying to find out, they're keeping that tight-lipped. I did ask Nick at the podium yesterday, if he interviewed other candidates. They said yes. Tried to find out after. Wasn't really getting any information there. So my guess is
why? Why would they not say?
Well, what do they have to say?
I don't know.
Well, if it's
because it was asked.
Why wouldn't the candidate one? Why wouldn't the candidate?
That's my point, Joe. If the candidate, that stuff always leaks out because that helps people get jobs.
No doubt
in the
about
next
it.
One.
Yeah. It leads. That's a huge part of this process.
Which is why I don't believe it was extensive.
You need to have your name on that to get the next line of interviews.
Well, but this also, there are rules about how many candidates you have to interview outside the organization. But bottom line is this, and I think this is the true lesson. It was always going to be Kevin Patullo. We can find out who they interviewed. I don't really think it matters. That person was not going to.
Why does it seem like that was such a surprise to Jalen Hurts then? Jalen Hurts, the quarterback, who will be working hand in hand with Kevin Patullo. When he's asked about Kevin Patullo being the offensive coordinator last week, his response was almost incredulous. No, that's not his role here.
So, Eliot, I'll say this before you respond. I just think Jalen gives a lot of stilted answers, and that's an example of them. I mean, I don't know quite what it means about what he thinks.
Okay,
I know John's concerned about it, but, listen, maybe Patullo wasn't number one on Hurts's list, but maybe. I'm using the word maybe. Maybe he was. But if he was number one on Sirianni and Howie's list, that matters more to me.
No, I agree with you. Now, Nick did say yesterday part of the benefit of Patullo is the continuity he brings to Jalen specifically. He mentioned Jalen. So obviously I think Jalen was taken into consideration here. As to his answer about Kevin Patullo, I was standing right next to Jalen when he said it. I think there was an element of him being thrown off by the question. It was 2 days after the Super Bowl, and it was a fair question. I just don't think he was expecting to be asked about it. Now, that being said, sometimes you get your most honest answers when you're thrown off, right?
Sure.
So I do think the way he responded was a little telling, but mostly I think Jalen will probably like the continuity of it all, and I think my guess is he probably is in favor of it just because it does keep continuity that might not be outside the building.
All right, Howie. Eliot. Two final things that interested in both. The first is you had referenced yesterday that in 2018, after the Eagles had won the Super Bowl at the Combine, you could just tell that the Eagles had just won the Super Bowl with the way Howie and I think you said Doug just walked in the room. There was just an air of, we just won the Super Bowl look, demeanor-wise.
Yeah.
Tell us what the demeanor was of Howie and Nick yesterday.
Yeah, so I actually, when I said that, what I meant more was how the people reacted to them.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
But I will say...
No, that's a big difference. I'm glad you clarified that. That's a very big difference, yeah.
Right. But I will say yesterday, one thing that stuck out to me outside of 2018 is just the lack of talking about winning the Super Bowl. We were around Howie and Nick for a half hour prior to the podium. They were on the podium for roughly a half hour. And I'm not even sure it was referenced by them outside of them being asked. So you do think about 2018 when they put the big Super Bowl logo up in the locker room and they really embraced the fact they had won it. 2023, I think a lot of it was about getting revenge on 2022. The sense I got yesterday was we're not going to hear much from them, obviously outside of celebratory events, but at practices, press conferences, I don't think you'll be hearing a lot about the Super Bowl from here on out. I thought it was noteworthy how it really felt like they tried to turn the page.
Got it.
Yesterday.
Okay, good stuff. And final thing, Eliot, what is on tap today?
Well, from an Eagles perspective, not much more. Howie and Nick have already talked. They won't talk again. I think today begins, at least from a media perspective, a lot of the draft guys. So the defensive line talked this morning. The workouts will begin. And then really it's what this event is about, which is they'll meet with prospects. But more importantly, they will continue to talk to agents through these next few days to get an idea on what the market is. So from a media perspective, no more Howie and Nick, but they will be here the next few days, doing work, meeting with guys, and, preparing for free agency and the draft.
Time for Howie to pull out those binoculars. Start zeroing in on dudes. All right, Eliot, outstanding report, my man. I'm glad you were there for us at the Combine. We appreciate it, and I suppose we'll probably talk to you later this week. Thank you, Eliot.
Yep, sounds good. Talk to
you.
All
right, there he is, Eliot. He really does a great job.